Ho ho ho, come one, come all. Welcome to the Historical Footnotes Christmas Special. Today we'll be answering all of your most pressing Santa questions. What is Santa? Who is Santa? Why is Santa? Where is Santa? What do elves taste like? All these questions and more will be answered in this video. Ho ho ho! Now let us start at the logical place to start, that is to say the beginning, which is the opposite of the end, which is where we will end up. I hope we're all clear on this concept. Whom is the character of Santa Claus based on? Why, that would be Saint Nicolas of Myra, born at some time around 270 in Patara in modern-day Turkey, which is why we eat turkey for Christmas. That last part isn't true, but do you know what is? An unknown amount of Saint Nick's life story. Because we don't actually know that much about his life definitively, because no one bothered to write it down until centuries later, and it's probably more myth than fact by this point, but here we go anyways. His parents were said to be wealthy early Christians who were having trouble conceiving a child, but then they prayed to God, and lo, it was so. His parents died in a plague because sanitation wasn't really a thing yet, and so he was raised by his uncle, the Bishop of Myra. His uncle had a vision that the child would grow up to bring joy to a great many people, and thus Lil Nicky was regarded as being especially holy from a very young age. He grew up being a very good Christian and was well known for being kind and always willing to help. Eventually, he became the next Bishop of Myra after his uncle. Now, Nicholas was well known for playing with the children, as all bishops do. However, in Nick's case, this was not a euphemism. Or maybe the church was just better at hiding it back then. And yes, I am going to make that joke on Christmas. To be fair, he is a serial home invader. Speaking of which, let's talk about that. So, once upon a time in Myra, there was a very poor man with 3 daughters, but he couldn't afford to pay for their dowries. A dowry is a payment a father had to make to the husband of his daughter to convince him to marry her, because back then they understood that if you're shackling yourself to a ball and chain for the rest of your life, you better be getting paid for this. Because of this, he was going to have to force his daughters into prostitution, because yeah, that's something you could just do back then. To help them, Nick threw pieces of gold through their windows, which landed in their stockings so that the money could be used to find them good husbands. Thus, Nick's association with needlessly complicated present delivery mechanisms began. He continued leaving unannounced gifts like these to those in need until he gave away everything he owned and lived out the rest of his life as an impoverished but holy man. Even after Nicholas himself stopped bringing the gifts, it is said that the people of Myra would hang up stockings in their times of need in hopes of receiving aids from others. Now, that's the big thing he's famous for, but he did do other stuff as well. So, let's get into that. He apparently got his bishopric not by being the nephew of the last guy or by being qualified or anything like that, but rather because his uncle said that whoever the first person to enter the church after his death was, that person would be bishop next, and it just so happened that that person was Nick. Because yeah, that's a great way to pick good people to fill important positions. When he traveled to Jerusalem, his ship was caught in a great storm, but he chastised the waves for trying to harm the sailors, so they went away. No, seriously. And afterwards, sailors said that they saw him protecting their ships during storms, which is why he is also the patron saint of sailors. He once apparently saved 3 innocent men from being executed just by accusing the juror of taking a bribe and then releasing them himself. And somehow that worked. It's also said that he was once imprisoned and tortured during Diocletian's persecutions, but he was an absolute Chad and did not break his oaths, and then was later released under Constantine. He is also said to have attended the First Council of Nicaea, which is this whole thing that's way beyond the scope of this video, but let's just say that it was a very important meeting. It's claimed that while there, he either slapped or in some tellings fucking decks the soon-to-be heretic Arius. In one version of the story, he's imprisoned for doing this, but is freed by none other than literally Jesus Christ himself. Incidentally, I want to make this part of the official Santa canon. Santa no longer gives out coals to the naughty children, he just beats them senseless. The last miracle is, Well, it's certainly something. So, during a famine, a butcher slaughtered 3 children and stuffed them into a barrel to sell them as ham. You know, as you do. Nicky shows up, makes the sign of the cross over the barrel, and the 3 children are immediately resurrected and presumably scarred for life by the experience. This is in fact the actual reason he is the saint of children. Also, for some reason, this association with barrels led to him becoming the saint of brewers. He was eventually canonized as Saint Nicolas, the patron saint of children, and also a whole bunch of other unrelated nonsense that I've mostly covered. He is believed to have died on December 6th, 343, and thus December 6th is traditionally considered his Saint-anic crash feast day. That seems like it's in poor taste, but hey, what do I know? Also, there's this whole massive controversy about his relics because apparently his body kept being stolen and moved, and now people aren't really sure which ones are even real, but I'm on a schedule here, so let's get moving on. But now then, I hear you thinking through your device in the comfort of your home where you think you're safe but you aren't, how did this early Christian saint, best known for sailing and saving subpar ham, become the fat and jolly reverse burglar we all know and love? Well, as the centuries went on, the story of Saint Nick began to spread, as stories tend to do. At some point, a tradition began in the Low Countries, where children started leaving out their shoes for gifts from jolly old Saint Nick, or as the Dutch call him, Santa Claus. But how did it get to the United States? Well, there was this fellow named Washington Irving, and on December 6, 1809, he published a book called Knickerbocker's History of New York. He described a sighting of the American version of Santa Claus, or as you know him, good old Santa Claus. This book popularized the chubby old reverse burglar. In 1821, a story called Old Santa Claus with Much Delight, yes it is spelled like that, would introduce both the reindeer and the idea that he arrived on Christmas instead of December 6th, which is St. Nick's traditional feast day. And similarly, over the next few decades, God, this sounds weird to say, the Santa lore would be expanded upon with more works from multiple authors. He would get married to Miss Claus, adopt his elves, named his reindeer, and move to the North Pole to live in his militarist sweatshop compound called Elfschwitz. That last part is my own personal addition to the Santa lore, so be sure to tell your friends and family. Now for the part of the video where I read off a list of random facts that I thought were interesting but couldn't find a way to fit into the script. Have you ever heard of Santa being referred to as Christkindl? Apparently, that name comes from the Protestant Reformation, when Martin the Reformator Luther tried to eliminate Catholic saints from church doctrine. So, he claimed that Christmas gifts were coming from the baby Jesus, or in German, Christkindl, which is where Christkindl comes from. Next, remember how in the Netherlands they have Sinterklaas? Well, instead of elves, he has a sidekick called Black Pete, who, looks like this. Yes, that is blackface, and if you think that's offensive, the Dutch mostly agree with you. Apparently he's being phased out by Sooty Pete, which is a much less questionable alternative, but the full blackface version is still present. On a more wholesome note, in 1891, President Benjamin Harrison became the first president to dress up as Santa, and apparently hoped that it would become a tradition. Despite this, only one other sitting president has ever dressed up as Santa. And it's fucking Ronald Reagan, of all people. And, oh boy, would you look at the time, which is say we're almost out of it. So, how do elves taste? Better than the reindeer, like a 5-star filet mignon. Personally, I think it pairs well with a fine eggnog. Merry Christmas.